The purpose of this show is to guide you to realign with habits that get you to live the life you've always dreamed of. This is the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast with Jesse Ewing. This is the Habit-Based Lifestyle, where you can access your full potential right now. Finally break free from destructive habits. That dream life, if you want it, you can have it. This is where you transform your health, mind, business, and relationships. Or do nothing and keep your life the way it is. But if you're ready for change, you're in the right place. This is where you're gonna learn how to live a habit-based lifestyle. You are tuning in to the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast with your host, Jesse Ewing. This is the Habit-Based Lifestyle. Let's go.
All right, guys, welcome to the Habit-Based Lifestyle and Business Show. Today, I got our very special guest, Habit-Based Lifestyle's very own Justin Weeder. Justin is our closer and sales guy for Habit-Based Lifestyle. And today we're going to talk about 4 steps to close high ticket deals and basically to give you guys kind of a framework of a process that we use for our own clients and how we close them ourselves. Justin, like, who would you say this show is really for? If we're talking about, in our group, we're talking about a lot of business owners and stuff like that, but who would you say this episode's really for?
Yeah, I'd really say this episode is for someone who is looking for a simple way to approach selling. Selling obviously feels very nebulous, and there's like tons of books and opinions you can get on how to do it the right way. But yeah, like you said, we're going to give a 4-step process that anybody can follow. That's not salesy or high pressure or anything like that. So someone who, might not have a ton of experience with sales and wants a simple process to follow, this is going to be for you.
Yeah. Hey, man, one of the big things that we hear a lot of times when it comes to a lot of the people we work with, we're talking about, chiropractors, we're talking about functional medicine doctors, naturopaths, coaches, consultants, even some people inside of telemedicine, nutrition. One of the common themes is like, hey, I'm not salesy, or I'm not a sales guy. So kind of before we get into that, maybe we can talk a little bit about that. That's really who this episode's for, is for that person saying like, hey, I'm not salesy, or I'm not a sales guy. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So especially when it comes to doctors or coaches, really what you are is problem solvers. And you solve problems by walking your patient through what symptoms they're experiencing so that you can identify what that problem is and then show them the solution, whether that's getting the spine adjusted, whether that's changing your nutrition, whether that's doing some mindset work, whatever it is. The people that are really watching this, you already are a salesperson. You just need to take those same skills that you learned as you learned your craft and apply them just into a different process, right? You wouldn't just go into a diagnostic meeting with somebody or a consultation and wing it, right? You have a process that you follow and questions that you ask based on what they're telling you. Sales is the same thing. And so if you can do that, you can sell. Yeah,
for sure. I think the biggest thing is a lot of guys I've seen that say, I don't want to come across as salesy, or I'm not good at selling. What they're really saying is like, listen, I don't have a sales process that almost makes it to where I'm not really selling. I'm actually, advising or prescribing what this person needs to help them. But first, we got to do what? What's the very first thing that when it comes to selling that we have to do to kind of get them through that process? So what would you say like the most important thing is?
I'd say the most important thing is to qualify the leads that you're talking to. Because as a sales manager once told me, like, you are not an alchemist, you're a prospector, right? You can't turn, shit into gold. You have to look for the gold. And that's what you do with qualifying. And that takes knowing who that person is. And it also takes, maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, Jesse, like it also takes being okay walking away from who it's not.
Yeah. Being okay with, walking away with a sale or not making a sale. So maybe the first part of that discovery is, yeah, we're going to see if this person is even qualified to get on the next call. But like, what's maybe one or two specific questions that you might ask someone to know that, or maybe a process that we would say, okay, well, now I know this person's qualified. Now we can kind of move on to the next stage. But what would be one or two questions that would have us be able to identify that?
Yeah, definitely. I'll give you two questions right now. So the first one is, hey, what made you decide to reach out, or what made you decide to look into this, or what brought you into my office today, or, what made you decide to message me? Any version of that where you're asking them like, what made you decide to start looking into this and start taking action on this? And then be quiet and let them talk, because they're going to tell you what the presenting problem is.
Okay, awesome. And then what would be another question?
Yeah. So then after that, it would be like, okay, because what you want to do is some people have a problem, right? And they know they have a problem, but they're not ready to address it, right? And that's not going to be good for you, because then you're going to be really frustrated thinking like, I can really help this person. But until they're ready, like obviously in any kind of coaching relationship or getting any kind of care, they have to do their part too. And you don't want to be bringing on someone who's not going to do their part, right? So you want to find out how important it is to them. And so the question you can do, you follow up with, okay, and why did you decide to do that right now?
Yeah, that's awesome. Why did you decide to do that right now? Now, what that's going to reveal is really like, hey, what made them reach out? I always think of, no one's going to get on a call unless there's a need that they have. And that's really what I believe, whether they're qualified or not qualified, them getting on a call is saying like, yes, I have something that I want to work on, or a problem I want solved. And then it's really more about, well, why do they want that problem solved? Like, what is that going to help them with in the future? And so that's really the first part of discovery is just getting those two questions. And the other side I want to kind of go through is the mindset side of a salesperson. What's maybe like a mindset that someone would need to have on a call, especially if we're talking about people who are saying, hey, I'm not salesy, or I'm not a salesperson. What's a mindset maybe that they should have before they get on a discovery call?
For sure. So the mindset really needs to be like, and I'll get a little spiritual with you guys, but the mindset kind of needs to be, hey, you do need to turn over the outcome to God or whatever higher power it is, whatever that means to you. Because at the end of the day, sometimes we take too much responsibility for someone else's life, and that's what causes the anxiety. You really, you have somewhat of control, but really your system is there so you can identify problems in the system and get repeatable results. It's not there so you can close everybody. And so sometimes we get someone who's not qualified, we think, oh, everything's wrong with my process, and the leads are crappy, and people don't want what I offer. And all those things are all tied down to one thing, which is you taking too much responsibility for that person's life. If they're not qualified, they're not qualified. That doesn't mean that they're not going to be qualified in the future. Or if they don't want to buy it from right now, that doesn't mean they won't be able to do it in the future. You kind of have to turn over that outcome to something other than yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's good, man. That's awesome. So inside of that, is really letting go of the outcome. Okay. So yeah. It's letting go of that outcome of, if they don't buy, I suck, my system sucks. If they do buy, even just buying into you're going to go into it without the outcome tied to it, and I think a lot of times we go into sales is like, someone who's says they're not salesy. I think when they go into a sales process or sales call, what they actually do is they declare what they don't want instead of what they do want. And so what happens is they end up getting more of what they don't want. And so it could be like, well, hey, I'm not a salesy person. I don't want to come across as salesy or pushy. And they're declaring that. And so more than what they're declaring what they want to be. And so what ends up happening is they come across as even more of that.
Yeah, because often what I find is that folks that say that have it kind of backwards in their mind, right? Because really where the sale happens, it doesn't happen in the presentation. It doesn't happen in the close, right? It doesn't happen by overcoming objections. It happens through the art of asking questions. And that's really the second step, which is discovery, where you're, if you think about it, like as doctors would say, like prognosis before diagnosis is malpractice, right? But often we go into sales calls in that exact way, right? We get to know our customers so well that we think we know what's going on. And you're actually probably right. But the thing is if the lead or the prospect doesn't know and they're not on the same page as you, then they are going to feel like they're being sold to, because they're going to feel like they're being pushed into something they're not ready for, right? So instead you have to, and a lot of people think that asking questions is salesy, and it's the exact reverse. Because, what do you associate with a salesperson? The golden tongue, the slick talker. And if you're spending time talking, that's who you are. But if you're spending time asking questions and listening, you're doing the same thing that you do in your practice.
One of the things that I see happen from a lot of people, especially the smart people we work with, is they stop asking questions and they start talking more than the potential client. And so the way that this would work is, let's say you're my client or you're a potential client. I'm asking you questions. All of a sudden you're like, hey, well, what's your credibility, or what have you done? And I start giving you, a 5-minute speech about everything that I've done. And so what ends up happening a lot of times in that is we're talking more than asking questions. And so we begin to give a bunch of information, we begin to teach, and then we lose the frame of the sales conversation, or we lose the frame of the questions. So now all of a sudden you're controlling the entire conversation. I'm no longer doing that. And I'm explaining and teaching everything that I've done and kind of giving you my laundry list of how great I am and why you should work with me, trying to convince you of that. And so I've now just lost the sale just in that alone, because you're going to feel like, man, this guy gave me all this information about himself, but I still don't know how he can help me solve my problem.
Yeah. There's a couple things that play there. One of them is like, when the brain starts getting information, it wants more information, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but as a salesperson, you kind of have to control the flow of information, because otherwise the prospect is going to just be drinking from a fire hose. They can't process all that information all at once, right? So you kind of have to walk them down a step. That's why your process is so important. And then on top of that, once people have too much information, they have to think about it, because they have to process it. It's only fair, right?
Right.
You gave them a shitload of information, and now they don't know what's right from wrong. They don't know, they might need to go talk to somebody else to make sense of it, right? And then you spend all that time talking about yourself, and that has nothing to do with them, and they're not interested past the first 15 seconds. Like when it comes to that, those kind of questions where they start to turn it around on you, what you really need to remember is that's a defense mechanism, right? And you can easily flip it back by saying, hey, if you got in a car accident and you were ejected out of your window and you were laying on the street with a broken arm and bleeding out of the side of your head, and an ambulance pulls up and says, hey, we're going to take you to the hospital, would you stop that ambulance and go, wait a second, where did you go to medical school? You wouldn't, would you? Right? And that turns it around and they go, okay, you're right? It's like, hey, no, I'm here for a reason. Okay. You didn't just find me randomly and I somehow convinced you that I know what I'm doing, right? I'm the ambulance, and look around. I can help you, but let's focus on what's important.
So one of the things that I don't remember who told me this, but one thing that I heard a long time ago was whoever asks the more powerful question controls the conversation. And so in this, you have to, so say somebody asked me a question, a lot of times one of the most powerful questions you could ever ask someone is like, well, what do you want? But sometimes when people ask me questions, I'll answer them, but I'll answer them in 1 to 2 words, and then I'll immediately turn it back to them. And so we have to get really good at answering questions in a couple words or a sentence, and then coming back with a more powerful question so that we can regain the control of the sales process or the control of the conversation. Because if we don't, we're going to lose it. And I always tell people, listen, if you wrote down your answers and your answers have a lot more words than the person you're talking to, you've now just lost control of the conversation. And
right.
And so when it comes to sales, it's the same way. If we're answering questions longer than the other person, that means that we're losing control of the conversation, and we have to come back to that. And so I think that's a really powerful thing, and really understanding, like, how do I know if I'm doing too much? And I think that's the number one way that we know that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had somebody that I was training ask me, like, why does that matter, one time? And I told him it matters because if the prospect is in control of the conversation, it's kind of like someone without a license driving a car, right? Like, are you going to maybe get to your destination? Maybe, right? You might get there safely if they know where they're going, if they have a GPS, but likely they don't. That's why they're talking to you. And so it's your responsibility, right, to maintain that control so you can get both of you to the destination safely. And on top of that, like, it also communicates to them subconsciously that you care more about hearing them and what's going on with them than you do about talking to yourself, which that builds trust for you automatically. You don't have to try to build trust there. That builds it automatically. That's
good. And, one thing that I find is if people tell me, like, hey, great question, that means that they're really having to think about the question I'm asking them rather than just come back right away. And so I always try to get anybody I'm on a call with to tell me, oh, that's a great question, because I know that they're really having to think about the answer instead of just come back right away. And I think that's really important when it comes to whatever we're doing. Is if you don't want to be salesy, then just have better questions to ask your prospect, and you won't ever feel salesy.
That's 100% right.
So number 3, so we have, kind of the discovery. We have asking great questions. What would number 3 be?
So number 3 would be, then you present a very descriptive transformation, right? And some people call that the solution, but I think that gets confusing. I don't want to call it the solution because the solution implies that you need to walk them through what you're going to do, and you don't need to do that. In fact, that's going to bore them to tears. Okay. They don't care what you're going to do. What they care about is, can they clearly see that A, you're the one to help them, and B, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. So you need to describe that to them in a way that hits, that resonates, right? And so I found the best way to do that is either with metaphors or with stories, right? So if you use a metaphor, one of the metaphors we use when talking to our clients is we talk about their Facebook profile. And I tell them, hey, if you're driving down the road during a road trip, there's like billboards everywhere, right? And you barely see them. But as soon as you start getting hungry, then all of a sudden it's like every mile and a half or every quarter mile, there's a billboard for Cracker Barrel or McDonald's or, Subway or whatever. And eventually you break down and you're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to get some Subway, and you get off the highway and you go, and that's why they're there. And so we turn your Facebook profile into that same thing so that the person who needs your help, it stops them in their tracks, just like a billboard, right? And so when you explain something in that way, someone can kind of because often they're there talking to you because they don't understand what you do and they need help with it though. And so when you relate it that way with a metaphor or a story, you can help them more quickly absorb the information, and you're going to reduce the amount of time that they need to think about it or consider doing it. Because often that's what it really is they go, yeah, this guy says he can help me and he seems pretty confident in that, but I really don't know how he's going to do that. And that's even after you went through and spent 30 minutes explaining your whole process. It's not necessary. Use metaphors and talk in short bursts and get their buy-in to the plan.
Yeah, that's good, man. I think, if we bump over to the mindset side, we have to have a belief in what we're selling. I think that's really important. And so, one of the things that I would always say is, number 1, it starts with me. Do I believe in what I'm selling? So would I buy what I'm selling? If I say yes, then I move to the next person. Would my wife buy what I'm selling, or would my spouse buy what I'm selling? If they wouldn't, and you legitimately need to ask them, like, hey, would you buy what I'm selling? Because if they say no, they are the closest person to you. And if they don't believe in what you're selling, you're going to have a really hard time selling someone else who isn't that close to you. And so those are two like mindset things that you may want to think about. If you're watching this, is like, hey, would I buy what I'm selling? And would my spouse buy what I'm selling, because they're the closest person to you? And if they wouldn't do it, then there might be one of your biggest problems. And then you can go back around and say, well, what would it take for me to offer this to you where you'd actually want to buy it? And I think you could get some valuable feedback from those two things just alone from a mindset perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Also, going through and asking those people if they buy it, like I love doing that kind of thing with my wife because she's so skeptical. So if I present something to her and she goes, oh yeah, I'd buy it, I'm like, cool. I feel so confident because I'm like, if I convince her, okay, I can convince anybody.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. All right, man. So number 4, what would you say number 4 would be?
Yeah. So number 4 is when you get down to the close. And this is probably the part that people are most afraid of. And so I'm going to break a myth that you've been told, or you've probably heard, or you've seen in movies. I'm going to break the ABC myth. Okay. ABC stands for always be closing. Respectfully, that's bullshit. Okay. Because you can't always be closing because you don't know if they have a problem you can solve. You don't know if they have the money, all that stuff. I could go into it for days, but
come on, man. Wait a second. You mean Boiler Room told us a lie when they said ABC always be closing?
Yes. That's total BS.
It's one of my favorite movies.
I love that movie too. It's inspiring, especially for salespeople, but it's BS, man. And that's how they roll, right? For some people that works, but for a doctor, for a professional, right, that's not going to work because they can't always be closing, right? And that makes them feel slimy. I don't want you to feel slimy. I want you to have something that makes you feel good about what you're doing and that you can get behind and do confidently, right? The key there is to flip it on its head. So when you get down to the close, there's one or two things going to happen. The person's either going to be like, hell yes, and they'll ask you what's next. Okay. You can't guarantee that. That's just, some people are action takers, right? Some people are task oriented and they're done. By the time you get done with your presentation, they're like, cool, I'm sold. That's how I am. I'm like, cool, I'm sold, dude. Like, you don't have to ask me, give me the keys or whatever. Like, I'll give you my credit card. Let's go. What do we need to do? But the other half of people, they need something to push them, right? They need something to inspire them to take action. So instead of drawing someone in or pushing them to do something or trying to convince them, instead, what I would encourage you to do is to inspire them to take action. And you do that with a challenge. Okay. So it works best if you put it on the end of a story. All right. So you tell a story about one of your previous clients that had the same situation, or you tell a hypothetical story, that's fine too, as long as they know it's hypothetical. And then at the end, you say, yeah, so that's the results that so-and-so got. Now, for you, do you think you'd be able to get better or the same results in the same amount of time?
Love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back through this. So we have number 1, which is discovery. We have number 2, asking great questions. We have number 3, which is, having a solution to their problem, or really, I think maybe a better way to say this, and you kind of helped us with this when you came in, was having a game plan of, hey, here's how this works, and then giving them very specific things like, hey, first we start here, second we go here, third we go here, and then can you see how this process or this blueprint is going to help you with this, right? And so it's really covering like, hey, here's how we're going to help you with your problem. Here's how we're the solution to that. And then number 4 would be what again?
That would be the close, issuing them a challenge.
Yeah.
And that can be in whatever form you want, but challenge them. Don't ask them to buy from you. You don't have to ask for the sale. Challenge them to take up the gauntlet themselves.
Yeah. Awesome, man. And I think maybe a bigger thing over all of this is have a consistent process of discovery, of questions, like of the solution, and then of the close, so that as you go through the sales process, you have these markers along the way that you make sure you're hitting. Because one of the big things that I see a lot of times is people don't have a process. And so they don't really know how they can fix their sales. They just are like, I don't know why I can't close people. I feel like I'm salesy, but I think overall, this whole thing is these 4 steps are really a process that you can go through every single time. And then you can start making adjustments on that as you go.
Yeah, definitely. But if you're not following the same process every time, you're going to get wildly inconsistent results, and you're not going to know what to change or what's causing it or why, because in your mind, every single sale will be different. But I'll tell you, I've been in sales for 16 years and every single sale is the same. I mean, it's the same thing with different questions and different metaphors. I mean, really, because the human brain makes decisions in the same way across every single industry. And so if you think like that and you really can buy into that, then it makes it easy for you to get on a call and say, cool, I'm just going to run my process and leave the rest up to God or whatever your higher power is.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think the coolest thing is when most sales happen, it doesn't feel like a sale, right? It feels almost like, hey, we're helping this person solve their problem. What I always love to tell people is like, listen, you can do this on your own. And you'll figure it out on your own. You can do nothing, right? You can do nothing. You can do this on your own. I believe that if people are business owners or entrepreneurs, I believe they're usually savvy enough to figure stuff out on their own. Now, here's the big thing. The reason why people would choose to work with us or work with you is because you're going to help them accelerate the results that they want in their life. And that's really why they need your solution or need your help. So you're going to save them time. You're going to save them money. You're going to save them energy. You're going to save them stress. And that's really why, they would want to work with you. And that's what I really believe, that when I get on every single call, those are my kind of core beliefs, that it's like, listen, you can do this on your own. You'll figure it out at some point, whether it's with me, someone else, it doesn't matter. But what we're going to help you do is help you from making mistakes along the way and get to where you want to be a lot faster. So we're going to speed everything up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great way to look at it, because it gives the person that you're talking to choices. People don't like to feel like their choices are limited, right? That makes them pull away. And so if it becomes their choice, then they feel much more empowered and they're much more likely to choose the one that's best for them.
Yeah, I know we talked about, 4, but give me kind of a bonus, man, like a bonus thing, like, cause I know a lot of people go into closing, and once they go into closing, I find that people talk too much. And one thing that I really, especially the guys that we're kind of dealing with and working with, their business owners, is they're very smart, intelligent people. And so when they get uncomfortable, they start talking too much. But when it comes to closing, talk to me about that process. Is like, cause I know I was always trained that like, once you ask for the sale, like, hey, it's this or this, you don't say anything and you wait for them to answer. Is that kind of what you were trained on too?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like the very first thing you give them, if you give them some information or you give them a question or it's time for them to make a decision. Yeah. You got to sit. And people say, oh, the first person to talk loses. I hate that, because they don't lose, right? It's more like you create the space for that person to make a decision. They can't decide if you're filling their head with more information and keep talking, right? They need a second to think about what you're saying and figure out like what they're doing in that silence. Is they're not sitting there trying to cajole you into talking or give them a discount. Like, that's victim thinking. What they're doing in that time is they're mentally walking themselves through like, oh my God, I'm about to make a major lifestyle change right now. Or, oh my God, how am I going to pay for this? Or, oh my God, like, I had $10,000 in my bank account. Now for this, I'm only going to have $5,000 in my bank account. Is that going to be okay for me? Is this worth it? Right? They're thinking through those things. And if you interrupt them, I mean, first of all, it's incredibly rude, but it also is going to stop that thinking process. And then they're going to go into fight or flight mode. And you know what that looks like? It looks like this. I got to talk to my spouse. I got to think about it. It's just too much money, right? That's fight or flight. That's not them using their higher order thinking. So be quiet and let them use their higher order thinking. And when they come back with something, you kind of start the sales process over again. All right. So then when they come back with something, instead of talking more, what you do is go back to questions so you can understand their perspective, right? And so you can give them time. Sometimes they say, I want to think about it. It's not really what they mean. What they mean is, I need to get out of this situation because I'm scared.
Right.
Right.
I think one of my favorite lines is when somebody comes up with an objection, we often get scared, but I think one of my favorite lines is like, hey, tell me about that.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
when they're like,
perfect.
hey, I want to think about it. And I'm like, well, tell me about, what you want to think about, or tell me about, I want to talk to my spouse or whatever. Cause I think a lot of times we're faced with, well, why do you want to talk to your spouse? Or why do you want to think about it? And it comes off as very abrasive where, we just want to ask, just ask questions or ask people to tell it about it. I think sometimes people just want to get things out, sort through it in their mind so that they feel the best about making that decision.
Yeah. The number one thing that stops people from moving forward on a call is fear of making the wrong choice. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's purely because they have done that before and someone has shamed them for it. And they're remembering that situation. Right. And so you want to ask them questions that's going to get them back onto thinking about the vision and the transformation and away from the fear of making a bad choice.
That's awesome. And I think the last piece on that, which I find a lot of people have trouble closing sales, is because they talk logically and not emotionally. And I think, yes, logically, maybe your program or service makes sense, but if we don't get to the emotion of it, then people will not buy, no matter how it makes sense logically.
That's right. Yep.
So
because unless they can, it's all about feeling, right? If I feel like this is going to be the right thing, then I'll do it. If I feel like you can help me, then I'll do it. Because you can't convince them that you can help them, right? You can't, because in order to do that, you have to actually help them.
Right. No, that's good, man. Well, hey, dude, thank you so much for being on here. Guys, Justin is a badass closer. Inside his first 30 days in our program, he was already closing people, and I've learned a ton from him in sales. He's got 16 years of sales experience. So if you're watching a replay on this, don't be afraid to comment, ask some questions. If you want to know more about this sales process and what we're doing, we're going to be showing up here inside the group, on a week-to-week basis and just talking about sales and some different things and bringing you guys value. If you're listening to this on the podcast, you want to find out more about us and what we're doing. We also just created a new program that's called the 6-Figure Blueprint. And it's a brand new process that we walk you through. It's really for people who are kind of beginner, wanting to take their business online virtually, or maybe they've done all the things, right? The Facebook ads, the funnels, the 5-day challenges, and they've wasted a lot of money and gotten little to no results. That's what this program is really for. And then of course we have kind of the higher level program of what we're doing, which really offers you, the coaching and accountability along the way, which is our accelerator. But we have both of those programs available, and Justin is a key piece inside of, both of those programs. So thanks for being on again, man.
Yeah, man. It's always an honor. I appreciate it.
All right, guys, have a great Friday.
The purpose of this show is to guide you to realign with habits that get you to live the life you've always dreamed of. This is the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast with Jesse